All right, well, we will get started. So we have a presentation that Mr. Testa and I will be going through tonight for all of you. And then Kathy Riccio, our Director of Nursing, and Mr. Hodgson will be joining us as well. Kathy Riccio, Director of Nursing, and then Kyle Hodgson, who is our Athletic Director. We'll be talking a little bit about what he is currently aware of as it stands with school support. So I'm going to go to presentation mode. Present. Oh, that's not what we wanted. I apologize. Give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so the goal of tonight is really to provide an update on the planning that we've been working on really since June. And just to really throw it out there, there's been so many moving parts to this, but I didn't really want to go much longer without being able to bring parents together. Tomorrow, we're going to be meeting with students just to give and share really where we are at currently in the planning process. But I do want to reiterate, this is kind of a snapshot of currently where we are at in terms of thinking about how next school year could potentially look like. But also acknowledging that the state, by the end of this week, we're supposed to submit 3 feasibility studies just around 3 possibilities, from a full return to a hybrid return model, implementing fully remote. And so the question that's really been guiding us, obviously, is how do we reopen safely? And then the other piece, continue to advance the academic growth of our students as really a big part to all of this. And so this presentation tonight is really organized around those 2 areas. So generating a plan that fosters confidence in returning to school, but recognizing that there's the academic component, that we have much stronger structures than we had in place during the spring when we had shut down on March 13th. But then also at the same time that the safety protocols that we have in place are manageable and that we're all engaged in them while in the building. And so this again highlights our goals for tonight, is providing that overview of our planning thus far and the safety measures that we have in place, and then obviously kind of our thinking around what curriculum and instruction will look like come the fall when we return, in whichever shape that takes on. Now, we do have set up on the district website, and so I just want to take a couple of minutes just to kind of guide you through this. If you were to go to the district website and then scroll just a little bit lower, you'll see there's a tab for high school parent presentation, ask a question. So if you click on that, then there will be a form link that you can click on, but there's a little bit of a catch to this, is you do have to hover your mouse over the very end of the form, and then a line will show up, and that means you'll be able to go to the Google form. For whatever reason, if you're over here, it takes you to the next slide on the district website. So it's a little glitch in our district website. So just know that if you go here, if there's something that as we're talking, you have a question that you want to throw down, you go to the very end of the link and it'll take you right to the question where you can drop something in there. But we do not have, it looks like we have 118 participants. So we'll see where we're at the end. And try to go through as many questions as we can. Now, one thing I did want to share, because this has also been really guiding a lot of our thinking, is back in mid to late June, we had pushed out a questionnaire. So first of all, to really just get feedback from students and parents on how the remote learning had gone during the spring. And so what we had done is going through all of the responses, we worked to really identify common themes that were being shared. And so these were the main themes that came up in terms of if we are to engage in remote learning next year, that we want to make sure that we're hitting the mark on these. And so one big thing is a predictable and consistent daily academic schedule that mimics the school day. That was a big one that almost everybody put on there. Accountability structures are in place, because that was another thing that was difficult at all levels, from the teacher level and the student level and the parents level, that there really weren't great accountability structures such as attendance, due dates, and then grades. So that will be a big part of if there is a remote learning component. And then clear and consistent learning expectations across the board with our teachers. And then the other big thing is making sure that as we're working within our classrooms, whether it be remotely or hybrid or full on, that there's structures that really work to build classroom and school community. So teachers have been doing a lot of planning this summer with their curriculum, but just around, all right, how do we really embed community building within the classroom, just with activities that we would have our students engage in, but then also at the same time, from my level and Mr. Testa's level, making sure that we have structures in place that also support us being able to build school community. We have a lot of great things that we had been working on over the past 2 years from the work our peer trainers have been doing. And if there's a time that's so important now for us to continue to push forward with that is obviously this year. And then a lot of the work that we had going on just with school culture and our student council. So we want to make sure that we have, as much as the teachers will be working to build a sense of community in their classrooms, we want to have structures in place that build a sense of community within the school. And one of the things that the teachers are really focused on is really trying to make sure learning activities support a lot of collaboration at the student level. And then the other big thing was making sure that as a district, that we have a single platform for online meetings, and recognizing that across the school system, it varied. At the high school, we did not in the spring mandate that a teacher needed to use Zoom or Google Meets. So as they started to engage in the virtual lessons, some teachers used the Google Meet, some used the Zoom. But as a district, we will be making a decision on which platform to move forward with. Now, another question that was part of the questionnaire back in the spring was, what does safety mean to you for returning to school? And again, we went through the same process of going through all the questions and then really trying to identify the main themes. So having clear and manageable safety protocols that are in line or above the state guidance. A big thing that was out there is having confidence that everyone in the building will follow the protocols. And so we recognize that we have the task of right from the get-go of establishing that culture of wellness and how we all have a responsibility for each other's health. And when Mr. Testa starts to go over some of that safety protocols, hopefully you can see some of the things that we're putting in place so that we can establish that we have social distancing in place that's in line or above what the state is recommending. And then that we also have strong protocols oversight. So it's not just all falling on the classroom teacher. And we kind of interpret that it's, what are we going to maybe do differently at the administrative level to support what's happening in the classrooms, but then obviously in the halls, but then also what can families also contribute as well, and helping to make sure that everybody's being very thoughtful about following the protocols. And then obviously one of the things tonight, which is also why I wanted to move forward with, even though we don't have definitive answers on how things will look in the fall, but really just having the opportunity to share with you kind of where our thinking is at. And the questions that will be provided will provide us with some good feedback in terms of, all right, what if there's something we hadn't thought of that maybe, all right, let's pay some attention to it. Now, another piece that you may or may not be aware, so Mr. Gallagher has organized a district task force. So all administrators in the district are a part of this, and curriculum leaders. And then we also have teachers representative of all of the 4 schools. We have members of the Board of Health. There are parents that are part of it as well. And then there's community leaders. And what's great just with some of our parents who just have pretty significant roles just in the health field, really providing some guidance around the different protocols that we're putting in or planning to put in place. So it's a great group. It's a group of just over 60 people, so it's pretty large. But we meet together for usually how the meetings are structured is we meet initially together And then we break into our subgroups. And over here on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the different subgroups that are part of the team, from a district level focus to social emotional. How are we going to support the social emotional elements for students? Curriculum and technology, special education, facilities, and then also safety. And then just to provide a general overview, which I think just earlier on I alluded to this, that there's planning in two big areas that has been going on. And so as I mentioned at the very start of the presentation, that our plans for a hybrid, a full in-person and remote learning are due to DESE by July 31st. And then the state has asked all districts not to release their final plans until a couple of weeks into August. I think what they want to do is, in talking with Mr. Gallagher, is that they want to look at everybody's plans just to get a sense of where most schools are at in the state. It's unclear if the state is going to be dictating which way we go. I do feel that school systems will be making their own decisions in terms of what's most viable way to return based on the size of the building, how the classrooms are set up, the amount of students that are part of the school. And then we also have the in-school health and safety protocols. So the state did provide, so they've now updated all of their guidance. So the last piece of guidance came out this past Sunday. And so many of you may be aware that they are recommending that a minimum of 3 feet be offered for physical distancing. I know in some school systems it's, I think one thing that we're trying to think about as we're looking at what the maximum class size could be or what a classroom capacity could be is trying to go beyond that. And then the other big thing is that staff and students are wearing masks throughout the day, but with the right training, knowing how to take an appropriate break during the school day from the mask, or even in the classroom with the appropriate distancing in place. And then the other major pieces are the health and safety protocols for any time that we're in school, if it were hybrid or full. And that's the protective gear that staff will have and that students will be coming in with their masks. It's going to be daily cleaning, and Mike's going to get into he's going to get into a little bit more detail with these. But then the big thing is just the daily health screening as well, which is a big part of us really trying to establish that culture about everybody's responsibility, for being aware of how you are feeling. So if you are not feeling well, not coming to school. And again, here is our charge from the state about really looking at the feasibility for a full return. What's the feasibility for us to do a hybrid model, and how would our schedule look like? What would it look like if we were in a hybrid model? And then full remote, how would our full remote really be different than how it was back in the spring, with a lot more structures and accountability in place? Okay, so I am going to pass this off to Mr. Testa, who is going to talk about our safety protocols.
Thank you, Andy. So actually, if you can probably just jump to the next slide. I think that's the one that has the list of probably the 10 biggest themes, or the 10, I guess, most predominant items that we've been brainstorming as a district team and with our teacher leaders, and most recently with some cohorts of parents as well. So the first thing we want to acknowledge is that we understand that everybody is really, I think, all over and in different places in terms of your level of comfort. We certainly know that's true about our faculty about the return to school, and we assume it is about for our students too. We're going to try to meet with them tomorrow at 1:30, and we respect that and we honor that. And Andy and I both have kids in schools. One for Andy just got out of high school, and another one is in a school in a different district. And I have 2 middle school daughters, so from a parental perspective, I can totally understand why you are on this Zoom meeting, I think, thirsty for information from the schools. So I'm going to try to cruise through this list pretty succinctly. And the idea is not to really inundate you with information about each one of these items right now, but just to let you know that these are the types of things that we're trying to be very thoughtful of so that we can create the safest environment for all of our staff, students, people coming into the building when we open. The first thing that's going to look different than it's looked in the past is the start of the school day. And if you're a new parent to the high school, it might not be as big of a change, but district-wide, we're going to a later start. And so the school day will begin at 8:15. But in addition to that, we need to restrict access to the building. And in the past, frankly, we really didn't have, as long as the building was unlocked, the kids could come in. They could get in at 6:30 or so. So right now the thinking is that people would be allowed into the building beginning at 8 a.m. So that for students, 15 minutes before their first class starts. And along with that, if you look at item number 2, it's monitoring the personal health prior to entering the building. And so that's a self-assessment tool that our nurse leader and some other staff have developed this summer and have begun to pilot through our summer school programs, where students and families would be asked, how are you feeling today? All symptom-related questions, but it would be web-based, and people would show that they've completed the questionnaire prior to entering the building. And to that point, we're planning to have 3 main entry points. So the front entrance of the school where the pillars are, and then one on the right side and one on the left side that will be staffed as people enter the building that can complete that checklist. And any student that forgot to or can't prove that they did it, they'd be escorted to the health office and they could complete the questionnaire there. The third item is a big one, and it's a classroom setup. It's something that Andy and I have spent a lot of time doing as custodians have cleaned out classrooms and moved furniture and waxed floors, and now we're throwing all furniture back into the rooms. Literally, there are 2 yardsticks taped together outside the office right now, as Andy's been looking at moving furniture and figuring out how many desks and chairs can we safely fit to that level of distancing within classes. So 2 key things in terms of classroom setup, or really 3, I suppose, is one is to maximize space. We've asked our staff to get rid of any personal belongings or any personal furniture, some stuff that just takes up extra space that would kind of clutter up where the desk could be spread to, because we want to have as much distance as possible. The next thing is that students would be pretty much lined up in rows and facing in the same direction. So to be honest with you, what the classroom setup looks like is not exactly our vision of 21st century learning styles and cooperative groups and kind of alternative seating structures. But for now, in terms of safety being the biggest priority, the desks for students would be lined up in rows, and there'd be a little bit of a buffer from where the teacher is up front to where the students would be seated. In terms of the next 2 items, 4 and 5, are start of class routines and then really passing time, which for us means in between classes. At the start and end, this desk will be sanitized in between every class session. So at the high school, which is a pretty complex environment with students that don't travel in cohorts like they might in elementary or middle school, there's kids coming and going in and out of the classroom. So we're trying to limit the number of rooms that a teacher would be in. But then when they receive students at the beginning of each class period, that the desks would have been sanitized, sprayed down, and wiped down in between each class. We're going to add to our passing time, which historically had been 4 minutes between classes, to see that if we need to stagger, maybe dismissing 1 floor at a time or 1 grade level at a time, but we're going to add and make that probably 6, if not 7 minutes, is our thinking going into the school year. In terms of our health office, which a lot of kids just refer to as the nurse's office, we do have 2 full-time nurses at the high school. We also had a school adjustment counselor who had her office within the health suite, and that staff member is going to be moved out so that that office space could be like an isolation room if someone is in the building exhibiting symptoms. And we're also going to structure our health office into somewhat of a well visit side of the office, as well as a sick visit side of the office, because a lot of our students do access the nurses for personal care. It doesn't mean they're not feeling well. And so that's going to be spaced out and structured differently. Bathrooms is going to be a pretty complex one. We have 16 student bathrooms, so there are 4 on each floor. And there's been guidance in terms of how many students are allowed in a bathroom at a time. And for the square footage and for what our facilities offer, it's going to be 2 would be the minimum, and maxing out at 3 students per bathroom at a time. We don't know if in terms of monitoring who's in there and how long they're in there, if we are going to need to perhaps shut down some bathrooms so that we could staff and have supervision outside, 1 in, 1 out. But that's something we're thinking about as well. But even within the bathrooms, the expectation is that students would be wearing masks, which brings us to item 8. Andy mentioned that there's going to have to be some training, and we had a meeting today with our teacher leadership team, and the feedback from them is going to be real important that throughout the building, that the people that are setting the example, which would be the adults and our leadership, are consistent with what the expectations are. So I'm going to need some training, and Andy some training, in terms of what will it look like to take an appropriate mask break. Now, if we have a school day that's approaching temperatures like today was, and even on a normal day, it can be pretty uncomfortable to have the mask on for a long duration of time, and we understand that. But with safety being the predominant concern, we want to make sure that the staff who are allowing students to take appropriate mask breaks can do so having been trained, and that students understand what those guidelines are. Lunch is going to be the single most difficult thing to manage at the high school, regardless of if we were full on in, all students in, if we were a hybrid model, which could perhaps be about half of our student body in. And what does that look like, and how do we provide lunch to students with choices, and how do we distance them safely? So we were planning with our new schedule for this year to offer only 2 lunch periods, and we are definitely not doing that. We're going to minimize the number of students in the cafeteria at any one time. If we were in a hybrid model with half of the school in the building on any given day, that would mean we'd have about 400 students. And we're looking at a schedule, which Andy will get into a little bit later, that would offer 4 lunch periods, which would mean 100 students at a time in that big cafeteria. And then the last thing is dismissal. And I know this ties also into bus ridership as well. We don't know exactly if we're going to need to dismiss by floor or by classroom, but much like the start of the school day, we don't want a logjam of students. Our stairways are quite narrow, and most students head out one of probably 2 main exits. They go down by the gym doors, and they go out the front door when we dismiss. And what we want to avoid is having a couple of hundred students congregate at one exit point at a certain time. So we might need to stagger our dismissal as well. There's a lot of other details that we're thinking about, some feedback from teachers just in terms of devices and school supplies, and can we hand things out to kids in class. So I only mention that to let you know that this list of 10 is certainly not an all-encompassing list. It's just kind of been the biggest items that we've been thinking about, but there's certainly a lot more. And if we have time, when we get to questions, we can kind of continue to add to this brainstorm of things that we should continue to be planful for.
All right, thank you, Mike. And we are also here with Kathy Riccio, who's our Director of Nursing. And she'll just provide you with an overview from the district level in terms of working with the nurses and, you know, just protocols that are really in place for as things happen during the school year.
Hello, everyone. It's really been an interesting time for a number of us, and we have been working hard to try to put together the safest ways for staff and our students to re-enter the building. And we continue to work on that. We utilize local and state leaders and guidance to help develop our protocols. So the basic, principles that we're going to follow are the tried and true public health mitigation efforts. So one of the smartest things we can do is try to not even have COVID enter our building. So he had mentioned kind of a symptom questionnaire. So we've been working on designing, we have designed a symptom questionnaire, and it has actually worked. Last week, I had a couple different people, when they stopped to think about it, they were like, oops, somebody in my family started feeling a number of these symptoms last night. Should I stay home? And I said, yes. So that's what we want to have happen. If you're not feeling well and you're showing these types of symptoms, please stay home, and then we can circle back around and see how things go from there. So that's a really great, important one of the efforts we're putting forward. And we offer that for high school students to know their own selves and take care of their own bodies, as well as we have a link that's an easy 2-question survey that, for families that are from pre-K to grade 8. And then you move on down the line. If you ride the bus, all students riding the bus need to wear a mask. So they'll be coming to our doors with the masks on, and we'll help to have extras if someone's forgotten them. But that is a tremendous way to tamper down the spread of the disease. Frequent hand washing, keeping kids further apart than what the state has recommended. We're still working on guidelines. I mean, they talked about it, but we still continuously begin to relook over. People have some other ideas. We rethink them through. We're working very hard to make this be a very educational experience, but yet also very safe. And we do have guidelines and protocols that we're again working on with other medical providers in the area regarding if we have a positive case, what are we going to do? We, of course, will be erring on the side of caution, but we have been working hard. And I don't know if there's anything, Andy or Mike, that you'd like me to address that I haven't brought forward.
No, I think that was great. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay, thank you all.
All right. And so now, whoops, can I no longer? Wonder why I can't. Oh, there we go. So just to talk a little bit about our academic program in terms of the the areas that we're trying to think through. So if we were to come back as a full return, so this is the schedule that we had adopted last school year with teachers and students. We went through a pretty elaborate process to try to make decisions on how we could get to a later start time. And then obviously the in-person instruction would be all 5 days of the weeks. You know, I mean, I do have to be upfront that as, you know, we're kind of going through the planning and the feasibility, this one would definitely just be a lift, even with the 3-foot distance with the desks and chairs in our classrooms. Just being in just in an older building, and our classrooms have varying sizes. But if we were back full, or if we're able to come back full at some point during the school year, our objective would be to try to run the schedule that we had intended to. But I do want to also stress, as I'm going through these possibilities, that these are possible schedules. If we were to come back full, it's possible that we may need to adapt and do things a little bit differently to minimize, for example, students that would potentially be in lunch. The hybrid model, and the idea behind the hybrid model is that you're only having approximately half the students in the building, and really works to support our physical distancing measures that we would have in place. Our commitment and our objective is that students would still have academic connections 5 days a week, albeit some of the days would be in person, some of the days would not be in person. And some of the days they might be working on a collaborative task with students at the teacher direction. But the objective is that students could be on site at least twice a week, and that when they are at home is that they would be following the bell schedule that we have set up here for the in-person students. And so what we've done, and actually back in June when our teachers started to work and think through the curriculum, we did ask them to really plan with hybrid in mind. So just realizing that pending on however we came back or whatever position we might be in during the school year, if we're in full, you can transition easily to a hybrid. If we need to go to a remote, you can transition your hybrid planning to remote. So it's just it made sense that was a place for teachers to really focus their attention, but really work to wrap their heads around. And what was great is the district provided a lot of professional development this school year, this summer rather, realizing that we had, you know, teachers that did have a little bit more difficulty than others in working with the technology. And those professional developments have been full across the district, including the high school, in terms of having many participants. But what so in terms of the teachers planning with hybrid in mind, realizing that for part of the week they would have a student in front of them, and then the other part of the week they would be at home working, is we asked teachers to really plan in kind of 3 ways. So depending on what the weekly learning outcome would be, a teacher may be thinking about it in one of 3 ways. So it might be that teachers would students would log into the class remotely to participate in the lesson with the students who are on site. So that's one way teachers may be planning to engage the students who are at home, again, pending on what the outcome is for that particular week. Another option in terms of their thinking, and this probably lends itself more to humanities and also pending on what's going on in science, is that the teacher, when they have the students on site, would be organizing the students for when they're off site. All right, you three are going to be working together on a task that allows you to go deeper with the work that we've done in class. Typically, when we walk into classrooms, that's, teachers, they have like an initial lecture part of the lesson, but then they also have students do some practice, but then they also try to engage students in collaborative opportunities that allow them to really go to deeper levels of the standard that they're working on. And so this may just be part of their planning, that the students, when they're off site, they're already organized into teams of 2, 3, maybe 4, and they have the Google Meet link so that they can work collaboratively on the task the teacher has set up. But then the teacher having a layer of accountability so that, by the end of what the block would be, this is what you're submitting to me, so that I know that the 4 of you or the groups all got together to continue the work that we had started in class. Another way that teachers are also planning is videotaping themselves. And so it's more of a flipped model of instruction. And by flipped model of instruction is that they're videotaping their lectures and providing examples and models that students view while they're at home and would be taking notes on. And so when the student comes into school, the teacher is then able to go deeper with the work that they had started to gain the information while at home. But the big thing is, whatever our goal is to create a bell schedule for students while they're at home, so they have that structure. And that was one of the big pieces of feedback from our remote learning plan back in the spring. So even though we had time slots that each departmental area would offer their kind of touch points or remote learning opportunities, it still varied in terms of when students were working. So we do want to provide a lot more structure there. Now, this is just one example that we're trying to think through. And again, a lot of this is still really contingent on where the district lands in terms of the amount of distance that we're able to have between desks. So right now, the state guidelines is a minimum of 3 feet, but obviously we're trying to strive towards 6. But again, this is all contingent on where we land as a district with that social distancing. So, but this is just one example of a schedule that we've thought through. And so where on a Monday, the teacher would be an all virtual day, where the teacher would guide the students. The student would go through all 7 classes. The teacher would go through their classes. We'd have a schedule, so you'd still have a good 15 minutes in between periods, just to give everybody a little bit of a break from the screen time. The classes would be approximately 30 minutes, but really the idea here is the opportunity for the teacher to set, here are our outcomes that we're striving towards by the end of this week, and to really provide clear instruction on how it was all going to play out for when the students were in school and for when the students were out of school. The teacher would use this to set up what their groupings would look like and get all of that out of the way, and then to be able to provide an overview of the core content and skills that the students would be diving into, and to be able to provide examples of what proficient measures of all the proficient understanding of the content and ability to do the skills would look like by the end of the week or over 2 weeks, depending on what the unit is looking for. And then students would come in for 2 days in a row. So the first half of the alphabet you'll see here would run through 4 periods. So A, B, C, D on Tuesday, and then A through L would go through E, F, G, and our clipper period the second day. And then the latter half of the week, the A through L would be home, and the M through Z would be coming in. And again, for a while the students are at home, that's the teacher is planning in kind of one of those 3 ways. It might be that students at home might be logging into the class, or the teacher has set up the situation where the students might be working collaboratively on a task. Or it's possible they might be viewing a video of a more involved lecture in preparation for when they're coming in. So again, I do want to stress, this is just one example of what a hybrid schedule could look like. So for example, if the whole district does wind up going hybrid, it is possible that as a high school team, we may not be able to dictate what in all virtue is. If the whole district follows something similar where there's going to be one day that students are not in the buildings at all, then it might be that Monday doesn't work for the whole district. And obviously we'd want to try to follow suit with where the district is at. But I did want to share with you what a hybrid model could potentially look like. Oops, and before we get into the athletics, and then with a remote learning plan, so if we were going remote, the idea is really that we would follow whatever our hybrid schedule would be, is that we'd really be working to kind of follow that same schedule, but at home, so that the teachers would be using the online meeting platform that we've set up. And so it may not be that they're on, so if they have an 80-minute block for a period, it might be that in the history class, the teacher for the first 20 minutes is doing a lecture and organizing kids into groups, and then the kids work collaboratively and they come back at the end to discuss, you know, either what they were reading or what they were talking about, so that there's a strong start, there's solid activities in the middle, and then there's strong closure by the classroom teacher. With the students participating. And again, as I had mentioned earlier, one of the big pieces of feedback from the questionnaire is that if we are remote, that we do want to have accountability structures in place, such as the attendance taking, the making clear grading expectations, as a teacher typically would if they were running a regular class on site. Okay. So now we also have Kyle Hodgson, our athletic director. He is here joining us as well. There's also been a lot of moving parts with athletics. So he was, he's going to say a few words in regards to what he is aware of with athletics.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Yes, a lot has happened over the last couple of weeks in regards to athletics. There was so much uncertainty early in the summer. And then, as you are probably aware, the colleges, individual colleges and conferences were starting to cancel their fall seasons all the way up until January. So we weren't sure how that was going to leave high school sports. So we were still planning, as usual, for opening on August 24th. And then recently, last week, the state came out with new standards for the sports activities for phase 3. And basically what that tells us is which sports are in the low risk category, the moderate risk, or the high risk. And if we looked at our fall sports programs, we can kind of see where we are in relation to those. Ultimately, Governor Baker is going to have the final decision. His office will have the final decision on when, if and when a fall season begins. But right now, the MIA Board of Directors unanimously approved a start date of September 14th for practices for preseason. So that's 3 weeks later than originally scheduled and planned. But at least that gives us optimism that we have a start date. And again, that's pending the governor's office approving that. But technically I believe the way it will work is we would have maybe a 2-week preseason. Games would begin right around October 1st. So that's about a month behind normal. And we probably would only play a Cape Ann League schedule. We wouldn't have non-league games. So it would be an abbreviated season. We're not sure if there will be a postseason for the MIAA, or if we would be allowed to have maybe a league tournament or something. But the bottom line is we would like to get our athletes back competing safely. Many are returning from last spring who didn't have that opportunity, and it was really devastating. And the seniors don't have that chance that our underclassmen do. But the key thing is having a sports program that's safe for all participants. And there are still many moving parts on how that's going to look. But back to the standards of sports, I'll just give you an overview of what the latest is. Based on our fall sports, the lower risk categories, which means full participation, we have golf and cross country that fit that category. So if this is approved by the governor, those sports will go as planned as usual. The moderate risk is volleyball, field hockey, and soccer. There are some modifications, such as right now wearing a mask, which would be really difficult for some of those sports. But we will do what is necessary to safely participate in an activity. So right now, the sports that I just listed would be able to participate in interscholastic events versus other schools. The high risk category, we have two sports. We have football and we have cheer. And right now that's only approved for individual workouts. So there's no practices, there's no competitions. So that's as of July 27th. That could change up or down. Just like with our school and our academics, it's going to be a fluid schedule, and there are some uncertainties, and we're going to go with it. And the bottom line is we're going to plan and prepare for different options and trying to provide a safe environment. We do have concerns and questions still that we don't have answers to. Developing protocols for practices and games. We need to figure out which sports are going to happen first and what that's going to look like. The locker room situation is a concern. I'm not sure the locker room will be used this year. So how is that going to look with equipment, and will it be more like a youth model where athletes are just showing up and already in their athletic gear? The athletic training room, which is a really busy place. We have 550 athletes in the fall, and many of them do get treatment of some sort. So maybe that's going to be a remote room where it's a bench outdoors, and because athletes are still going to need to be treated. Transportation to events is really a big one. Cross country alone had 147 last year on 3 buses. So based on, the new formula, we might be taking 7 buses, and bus availability is an issue. So these are things that we're trying to work out. And another one is spectators, protocols for spectators, or will we have spectators at all at any of our events? So those are things that are going to be worked out, and they're worked out on many, many levels, many layers to it. Really, the governor's office is driving this, the Department of Health. Certainly the MIAA will come out with their recommendations and restrictions. And of course, Newburyport High School, we may not agree with everything that's being said. We might come up with our own, but there will be baseline restrictions that we will have to follow. And then we will do what's best for Newburyport High School athletes and to provide for a safe and competitive atmosphere. And that's our goal. Thank you.
Great. Kyle, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So that's pretty much the end of our presentation, but we do want to take a few minutes just to look through. I think, Mike, you had looked through some of the questions.
Yeah, there were 7 questions or comments that had been posted. Some were very specific, and some were more thematic around the hybrid schedule that I think you actually addressed later in the presentation about what type of hybrid model might we shift to. But that word might, I guess, is something I think we should strongly go back to, because the last comment was very powerful, and I think it's real important to highlight is that while we've been working on this with our leadership team and brainstorming, even us on this call and with Andy and myself, Kyle, Kathy, the admin team at the high school, we're not making these decisions. We're going to collaborate with the district task force, and none of this, which we've shared tonight, is definitive. Certainly, we can tell you what seems more feasible in terms of the physical space that we have and the sizes of our classes and just how the high school operates, but there have been no decisions made at all. We're just trying to share as much of our thinking now as we can. And we didn't share earlier, frankly, because we knew the district task force was just getting going a couple of Wednesdays ago, and we'll continue to meet in subgroups, both on the Wednesday night larger group meetings, as well as in separate meetings. So we are going to share our thinking when it's called upon or when the opportunity arises, because there are, I think, some folks on this call that are also members of the task force. And we're just concerned, I think, about really our tone. It sounds like we've already made these decisions, and we just want to be clear that there have certainly been no decisions made for Newburyport High School, and those are actually going to come from the district level. We have things like teachers unions and other unions that we need to work cooperatively with and work with Mr. Gallagher on those final decisions. So in terms of the hybrid, like I said, I think Andy at least shared some of our thinking. if there were to be a district-wide hybrid model, we know for families that it would be ideal to have students from the same family home on the same day so that high school age children could potentially help to some extent, or at least be home for your schedules with the younger children in the other buildings. There was one very specific question about the air filtration system within the high school that I cannot speak to, but it does bring up a point that we're going to generate a list of questions and answers, some more frequently asked than others, and then post those. We'll put it out. We've seen examples that another parent had shared with her student who's going off to college next fall, and the university put that out and had them lumped thematically in terms of the healthcare protocols. So we could set up a tab of what does lunch look like, what does sports look like, what happens if someone's sick, and then just use it as a place to hopefully address a lot of your needs. I guess the two other biggest concerns that, I guess, Andy, you can jump in as well, had to do with the fact that I mentioned students at the high school would transition from class to class, which understandably, I think some parents or whoever posted, that didn't seem like the safest model, as opposed to like a cohort model. If you can think about middle school where they are in a team and they stay in that group, and in the past, they might have gone to their English teacher, and then the same 20 or 25 kids go to their math teacher, and they travel as a group. And the teacher this year, potentially at a middle school, could get up and move into that room, and the teachers would rotate through. With the way that the high school schedule works, we investigated what they call a cohort model, and there was no feasible way to lump kids together and have them travel to classes that we would determine and dictate. Part of that is because students take courses at different levels. Part of it is because really what we are all about at the high school is giving students the opportunity to, particularly as they get older and there's more opportunities in their schedule, is we really want kids to get out and explore something that interests them or their passions, or find out now it's something that they don't like, and don't take it in college if you don't like it in high school. And if we were to lump kids together, I'd be sending 20 kids to guitar class, and maybe 19 of them don't want to be there. And we'd be sending kids to different classes that they might not be best placed. So I think that's a long answer to the question, but at a high school model, it just really wasn't feasible to look at putting our students in cohorts and having them stay in one room with like peers, and then having teachers rotate through. And then the other concern was about lunch, and that's still something that is up in the air. You've probably seen that one of the early recommendations from the state was to have students eat their lunch in the classrooms. Whichever way you slice it, that lunch is problematic, because to have a classroom full of students with their masks off in a small classroom with 15 students in the room is not a good solution either. And we also need to have our teachers contractually have a lunch break as well. So what we were looking at was maximizing the number of lunch periods that we could fit in the day, and structuring not just the cafeteria, but we have a lot of great outdoor space here. Students historically have loved to use the courtyard, and we would encourage use of that whole back patio area that faces the stadium, as well as on the right and left side of the building. There's a lot of that second level terrace space that we'd be able to take advantage of to offer students outdoor eating. So lunch, definitely very tricky, and transition to classroom, very tricky. But one thing along those lines, which I did fail to mention earlier, is we did a facilities tour with a gentleman that works for a signage company that's going to help with those transitions. So we've designated counterclockwise, again, planning only, but this would be our response when we roll it out. It's not definitive, but students would travel on the second and third floor in one direction only, because the hallways are fairly narrow. Stairwells, we have 4 main stairwells. It would be 2 would be designated for up traffic, and 2 would be designated for traffic going down. And we met with this gentleman about signage to have arrows for which ones are up, which ones are down, standing in a queue spaced apart outside a nurse's office or outside a counselor's office. So I think those 2 logistical operational things of the life of the high school, transitions to class, other than classes themselves, and lunchtime are certainly, I think, they're concerns, definitely. We can manage if we had some guidelines about, all in, every student in, what does it look like in the actual classroom? But it's all the other things that go on in the life of the high school that become very challenging. And those are the things that were largely listed on that slide that we're trying to plan for.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, and I think just to really reiterate what Mike just spoke about, none of these decisions have been made. It's really just tonight was to really provide an overview of just the different ways that we've been thinking things through. And then as we meet with the task force, that kind of sparks different ideas for thinking. There's several meetings left with the task force. And then just really trying to come up with all possibilities so that eventually we can move forward with the best plan for Newburyport High School. We have our student meeting tomorrow to be able to address, as we kind of go through a similar presentation, but really to be able to get their input in terms of, and concerns as well as we continue to kind of think forward of different options. Kathy, I don't know if you want to maybe talk a little bit about the person you've been working with from the task force, and you did a walkthrough at one of the schools, and you'll most likely be coming up here to the high school, but particularly with the lens of the passing time. Oh, I may have to unmute you. There you go. Hold on. Or you may have to unmute yourself.
Excuse me. I've only been on Zoom since March 13th. Sorry, everybody. So, I've had the good fortune, sometimes these things that happen to us, we think, oh my gosh, everything's terrible. And then I have the good fortune to find out that we happen to have a parent who happens to also be an MGH epidemiologist and physician. And she has 4 kids in our district, but is extremely knowledgeable. And having met her, then we've walked through another school building, and I will be utilizing her as much as I possibly can. So she's given great guidance even today around some situations. And, this still remains fluid as we continuously look at data. The data comes in from the state or what's going on. But we will keep working on making protocols and work with our staff and have it be a community effort for all of us to be as safe and thoughtful of others when we're together. So does that answer your question?
I think so. Okay. And I know there were some people just got an email that we just fixed the Google form. I think some people were having a difficult time accessing it, so it should be more. It should be able to take anybody, if you're not logged in with the Newburyport account. Mike, so did that capture all of the comments? It looked like there was something in there also about athletics. I thought I saw a question there for Kyle.
There's a couple more that have just come in since I last looked as well about like open campus for lunch, which we haven't had discussions around that yet. Certainly in terms of spacing and being outdoors, and it creates that level of flexibility. It does just raise a bunch of other concerns about student safety and students traveling with one another and leaving campus and driving safety, which is different than COVID safety. But there's now twice as many questions as 14. There were a couple general questions about membership to the district task force, and then an earlier one, which I didn't mention earlier, about why aren't students on the task force. And that's something I can share with Superintendent Gallagher.
Yeah, and to also just talk about the whole idea of the leaving for lunch, or just like, for example, for students that might be assigned to the library for an enhancement period. We've spoken about, there's no reason why we can't have the doors to the outside patio open and students can go out there to read or even go on the front lawn. When we met with our ILT today about the possibility of using our outdoor spaces with greater frequency to conduct their classes is another possibility as well that we're definitely looking to take advantage of. And if we are in whatever shape or form that we are back. And I know, with a hybrid model, you have a lot less students that would be at a lunch. And if we do something where upperclassmen with some level of permission are able to leave, it reduces number of students who are in the lunchroom. But just from opening up our back doors and allowing students to eat on the balcony at 6 feet distance, and just using as much space as we can to allow students to spread out as best as possible. Let me see.
Someone wanted to know if we had thought through other extracurricular activities other than sports.
Yes, I can speak to that a little bit. When the question of whether a sports program was going to happen or not, as a league, we even discussed maybe some type of intramurals, some type of activities that were allowed and safe, because keeping kids in the community together participating is different than combining communities and getting on a bus and going with another community. So the different levels within phase 3 does allow for some inter-squad play rather than the interscholastic where you're competing against another school. That has kind of been put on hold with the optimism of hopefully as close to a full offering of sports as normal. But if something will be creative as creative as possible to provide opportunities in a safe manner.
Okay. And then just in regards to other extracurricular activities, our teacher advisors will be engaging their groups as well. And pending on whatever the circumstances are, if we are back, whether in like a hybrid mode, the possibility to meet socially distance on site or also virtually. Our peer trainers have been meeting throughout the summer to plan for the upcoming school year, but that has been obviously all done virtually. And then there's more questions. And then I know there was a question in regards to students on IEPs and with 504s. So that is a big part of the task force. There is a subgroup with a primary focus on that. And if we were to come back as a hybrid model and then remote with the plans that they would have in place, but with a hybrid model, there are accommodations that could be made if it's better for a student to be on site full time, or if the plan being implemented with a focus on the remote to make sure that accommodations can be met. Now, I know, Mike, you are on that subgroup. I don't know if you have any insight to offer on that one.
Yeah, so we have a new pupil services director for the district. So the committee is chaired by Gina Gardino, who's a special ed team coordinator here at the high school, and Nancy Koch, who is the new pupil services director. So we've met a couple times outside of Wednesdays, but really it's just the key issue that the team is considering is on access and just equal access for all students, regardless of what kind of platform we are in. So we meet again this Wednesday, and it's been a good team that we have.
Great.
Other comments that have come in, we don't yet know exactly what new student and freshman orientation is going to look like. I can tell you it won't resemble what it's looked like in past years where we bring them all in at one time. I think ideally it would be great to have on-site, perhaps smaller cohort tours, a smaller number of students at a time. We have not made final decisions about that. We also have not made final decisions or received any mandates regarding what our attendance policy would look like, but just in isolation, I would say we're going to definitely ease up on attendance protocols and not penalize students with credit loss if we're asking people to please stay home if you're not feeling well. Whereas in the past, it was really mandated that you had medical documentation for any absence to be excused. So schools in Massachusetts have to have excused and unexcused absences. And you're also required to articulate in your handbook what constitutes those two categories. Basically, what is your list of what becomes excused, knowing that everything else would be unexcused. And so we're definitely going to have to ease up on an attendance policy as we move into the fall. In fact, we went to print with the student handbook late June, we shipped off the contents to our publisher, and not really knowing where we would land on this, I just put like a big bold header. We have a whole chapter on attendance, and I put a header as the very first thing in bold that says, you know, due to COVID, we frankly said we don't know where we're going with attendance policy, but in normal conditions, here's the next chapter, and that we're just going to try to, you know, be cooperative and collaborative and work with students and families around attendance.
And there is a question here about when will schedules be released? So right now we are holding on to those. There are so many moving parts. So for example, one of the things Mike and I did today was to take a look at all of the class lists. And if we were in a hybrid model, what would that breakdown look like? And would we be able to do would the breakdown work well for the classes that a class would be, for the classrooms that a class would be assigned to? So there's some maneuvering that we still need to do there. But then also, if we're in a remote plan, obviously that's not as big of an issue. But we're still going through everything just to see, you know, for all three models, in terms of what things could look like. So those are still going to be on hold. Someone also put in there, have plexiglass barriers been looked into just to help with the spacing issue at lunch? So our director of buildings and grounds, so he's managing or co-chair of the facilities team for the task force. And so that is something that, so even in our labs, he's going to be, they're looking to order plexiglass that could divide the lab benches and have them separated out. And then depending on which model we return in, the question would be, would there be a need for the plexiglass in the cafeteria? The cafeteria and the refurbished room 118, depending on the number of students that we potentially would have at lunch, it's just very large. So if we had, for example, let's just say 75 to 100 students that were at lunch, there's ample space that students could be spread out over 6 feet. And then if we're using the balcony, or we're using our distance learning lab, and we're using the courtyard, we definitely have a lot of space. But the plexiglass is definitely something that we're looking at, even for the cafeteria, regardless, as a possibility. And then another question on the hybrid model: how will it be decided which student attend in person versus at home? So right now, this will most likely be by alphabet. The district is looking at it for a hybrid, because realizing that sometimes high school students are responsible for watching younger siblings at home. So if we were in a hybrid model, that would be something that might be consistent across the school system in terms of how that is sectioned out. But that's still something that needs to be discussed at the task force level in terms of what's going to be the best way if we were in a hybrid model, to decide, you know, which part of the alphabet comes in this day and which part comes in the next day. And then, will the school be offering options to parents to choose an approach? So one of the things that we are exploring is ideally that if a student is not comfortable coming into the building, or a family has made a decision, the student is not comfortable coming into the building, ideally that our goal is to try to keep students connected to classes, and then working with the classroom teachers to engage them within the lessons. So there's still a lot of work that we're focusing in on with our instructional leadership team in terms of how that can look. The state has said that they are going to be putting together a remote learning kind of plan, or not a plan, but I guess an option that could potentially be rolled out, but we're still waiting to see where that lands at the state level. But kind of our thinking with that is to see, you know, depending on the number of students that would not feel comfortable coming back to the building, finding a way to keep them connected with their classes and the actual teachers, just to, you know, so they feel like they're part of the community and what's going on in the school. Are there going to be, Mike, did you answer this one about changes to graduation requirements such as gym, art, MCAS? MCAS, I know there's been no decision from the state level, but it's very possible that may not happen this year, just from the different feelers I've heard. out there, but there has been no decision put on that yet at all. And as far as graduation requirements are concerned, I mean, we have our graduation requirements, but I think everything's kind of on the table for us to explore as we continue to move forward. And then we are wondering about the high school musical arts theater program. So as of right now with our schedule, our thinking here is still continue with those classes. So I met with, Mike and I met with Stephanie Williams, Lisa Zaleski, Mr. Cohen. Now, albeit the classes cannot look like they typically would, but there's still things that the teachers can do to engage students around the concepts affiliated with those programs. The arts, we're looking at using space differently downstairs so that arts can really spread out in terms of the visual arts. And we are also looking at changing where Stephanie Williams has her classes for the video classes, so that there's much more space and better access to computers so students aren't sharing. And then collaborative task groups. I don't know if this is for students or if this is referring to the district task force, but if we're referring to collaborative groups in the classroom, that's going to be organized by the teacher, and the teacher may vary it by the week, depending on what the objectives are for the week. But that is something I can bring up to the instructional leadership team, because maybe it does make sense that students kind of are already pre-organized into groups, and that's something that they stay with for at least a chunk of time or for a unit. So that's definitely a very good question for us to think forward on. And then now this year with study halls, we no longer have study halls. So that was one of the things at the time last year that we had to reconsider, which was the whole idea of the clipper period. However, we do have enhancement blocks for students that are overprescribed. So for example, if I'm a student who has an after school class, or I'm doing college credits beyond the school day. Or I'm an upperclassman who doesn't need all of the credits. So if you're a first period or a last period assignment to the library, that is something that we are considering. Can students be released versus staying in the building? So very good question there. And I think Mike hit a lot of these.
There were other questions just about people in the high-risk population, whether you're a student or a staff member. So students, yeah, the thinking is if we have a student with a health condition or someone in their family that's high risk, that they would be allowed to do their work fully remotely, would be the hope. And then on the flip side, if we have a staff member who cannot come to school or isn't well to come to school, the district's going to be working towards that through the work of the task force. The first subcommittee has our HR person on it, the union president, and the superintendent. So that's a big concern as well, as if we have teachers who can't come in, we might need to replace some staffing depending on whether or not people teach remotely or if they were to take a leave, for instance.
Mm-hmm. And then just there's a few more in here. Let's try to hit them all if we can.
There was a question about the grading system, and what was covered earlier is that from the feedback we got from our remote experience was we needed more structure and more accountability. So part of that accountability and structure would be a traditional grading system, lettered A, B, C, etc., whether we're remote, hybrid, or in.
Great. And there was a question, which, if any, classes are at risk of being canceled? And so right now, kind of our thinking is to keep all in classes going. It's just a matter of rethinking how they run. So that, the idea is that to maintain the social distance, and then obviously like with band, there just might have to be a different approach that's taking in terms of what students engage in during that class time. Mike, you just answered that one for the high-risk families, about the remote learning. Bus routes, so those are being pretty much taken care of. I think Mr. Gallagher, because there's a district level subgroup of the task force, and I think busing is part of that thing, but I know that is something that at his level that he is working on. And then we talked about the arts program already. And then the high-risk teachers. So those are stuff that I know Mr. Gallagher has been meeting with our with Joan Sheehan, who is the president of the Newburyport Teachers Association. And so really coming up with whatever those accommodations might be for a teacher that is at high risk. And then will NHS be a host location for ACT or SAT testing? So as of right now, we still are. But again, obviously they're setting up new parameters in terms of how rooms can be set up. But however, I don't want to necessarily commit that we are, because I think there's still, I know Ken Cole is the one who manages that piece, but there's multiple meetings that are still in process for SATs and ACTs in terms of how those will look. And what is the plan for Color Day? Well, we have not actually thought of that one yet, but I do have to admit, that was one thing that we struggled to do during the closure time was how do you really build that full school community? So that is a part that we are really trying to think through. And I do look at our student council as really being a big player in helping us think that through and come into structures. We did try a spirit week during the closure, but just didn't work out well. We struggled with getting the communication out there to the students. And will there be any changes to homework policy or expectation? And again, that'll be something that we need to continue to think through with our ILT. We do get it that however we come back, it's going to be a big adjustment for our students and really trying to be flexible and sensitive to their needs and making this really manageable. And then also, a big learn is that everybody's experience during the closure was completely different based on whatever situations there were at home or learning styles of a student. And the objective is how do we really work whatever model we go towards, really making sure we take the care of meeting the needs of our student population. And yes, so that was one thing that we had mentioned earlier. Will the teaching staff be fully trained on the Chosen portal for remote learning? And so that will be happening. And actually the district has already engaged. So hopefully that decision is going to come shortly. Because I know a lot of teachers, whether it's been Zoom or the Google Meets, but there's been multiple trainings just in technology in general. But there will definitely be training to make sure that everybody is good to go on all the intricacies of those programs. Okay. And then I think there was another question. So then it says, it was mentioned that for fully in-school learning, time between classes would be increased to 6 to 7 minutes. I'd like to understand how this would give staff time to completely disinfect each classroom. Is there a plan in place for that? So right now the plan is really, so students, and I think Mike kind of alluded to this or talked about this earlier on in the presentation. So part of the protocols is as students are entering into the classroom is that there's going to be hand sanitizer in all of the classrooms. So students to sanitize their hands. And then the last few minutes of the class, 5 to 10 minutes, is really going to be about each student sanitizing their area, their desk, prior to the other students coming in, is the current plan that we have in place around that. And then again, with the passing time, I mean, it's gonna be very flexible on how this really plays out, especially early on. So where we're looking at staggered time. So like the third floor may dismiss first, and then the second floor, and then the third floor. So to limit, and then as Mike mentioned, that it's only going to be one direction in the building. So on the academic wings that are circular, and then on the first floor and the basement, it's about, because that's going to be about staying to your right. And then Angela Bick is working with the building principals to really make decisions on all the signage that will be in place and the space indicators. So that if a student's coming into the library, that there's already a dot on a seat that shows, all right, this is a spot that I can sit, and with another dot being specified distance away. Okay. It looks like I think we hit most of these. And then obviously we want to, oh, and this was just, well, you know, this might be a way that we do parent meetings moving forward in terms of the virtual session. Actually, I'd probably get a better turnout. So, which is good. But yeah, that's definitely something that we can consider regardless of how we come back, is that, you know, the virtual meetings for parents could be a way that we go. All right. So I think we've tried to hit everything. So that link for the, I apologize, it looked like it was only set initially for if you were using a Newburyport address. So that was changed during the meeting so that you can press into it. But by all means, do not hesitate to either reach out to me, Mike Testa, Kathy Riccio, Kyle Hodgson. And if you're interested, I'll be honest with you. So prior to doing this presentation, we had reached out to a small group of parents, my school council, and some other parents that were in different leadership positions in different parental groups during the school year. And I know somebody had put in there, what are some ways that I can kind of help with the planning? Just shoot me an email, because I do like to run things by parents and students before we go public with them, because it provides me with valuable feedback in terms of figuring out the best way, not just to present, but then things that I just haven't necessarily thought of. So by all means, just shoot me an email if you have that interest. And sometimes it might just be me giving you a call and floating it by you. I know I had spoken to a couple of parents that are on the task force, just say, I feel like I need to do this. And they were, you know, agreeable, saying, yeah, it makes people are looking for information, even though there's nothing definitive, but just to be able to share some of the thinking that's really been going into this could be quite valuable for families. And so that's kind of where we're at, which is why we made sure to do this tonight. And then just let me double check to make sure no other questions came in. And then the air purifier, somebody just added. So Steve Burkholm, who is our Director of Buildings and Grounds, so that is something that is being looked into in terms of their filtering and the air quality. All right, so I see no additional questions. Go Clippers. So let me just comb through it one more time, if you don't mind waiting. And it does look like there are some, I think Mike addressed these just in terms of some of the rules that we've had. There's going to be a lot of flex as we kind of think things through. The goal is we want to have a safe environment, but with safety, there's not just the physical safety protocols that we want to have in place, but there's the social emotional layer as well. And that's for parents and for students. So I don't want, you know, students to be stressed out because, you know, they had a tough start today and they're walking in late or whatever it is. You know, those are going to be things we're going to be able to work out, you know, on an individual basis. And then if we need to go more globally on that, then definitely. So there is going to be a lot of flexibility in terms of how those things are rolled out. How many students? Yes, we will record the student presentation. And then how many students at NHS and how many staff? So we have approximately 85 staff if you include, and then if you include custodial and cafeteria workers, we're in the mid 90s. And then for students, it looks like as of right now, but we haven't had the rollover in our system yet. It looks like we would be at 816 for next year. But I don't believe students who are going to private school were taken out of that, but it looks pretty clear that we would be over 800 students to start the school year. Okay. I think we hit pretty much every question that is on here. You are welcome. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much for taking the time. I I definitely appreciate you being here tonight, and your questions are fantastic. Just as we continue to evolve the different plans that ideally can be put forth. I mean, as we work to wind up making a decision, ideally within the next few weeks, just so people can really start planning. Just in terms of, all right, what is it going to look like in the classroom and all of that. But so thank you everybody for taking the time tonight. Very much appreciated. And thank you for putting in your questions into the form.